I think that a lot of the mental health issues that men have is because we're trying to suppress how we truly feel. Like there's a fear that if you want to cry, cry, but we don't. So we hold it in. I think if you hold anything in, eventually it manifests itself in a way that we don't want it to. And it builds.
Welcome to the Mindful Paths podcast with Nick Day and Hari Kalymnios, where we explore the fascinating worlds of mindset, mindfulness, fitness, well-being, vitality, leadership and personal development.
Our goal is to provide you with the insights to help you live a more fulfilling, happier and healthier life.
If you're striving to be a better parent, friend, leader, colleague or boss, or if you simply want to be more mindful and aware of the world around you, then this Mindful Paths podcast is for you.
We invite you all to eavesdrop on our conversations and we challenge you to discover a new insight to help you on your own journey towards personal growth and positive change.
So sit back,
relax, and let's begin our journey together
on the Mindful Paths podcast.
Harry, how you doing? Good to see you, buddy.
I'm doing well, Nick. Thank you. I'm, as you are, in a hotel room. I'm in Lesbos, a Greek island here. So
how is sunny Greece?
It's nice. I'm getting a bit of colour, which is good, and I'm doing a week here, which is I think you might quite like this sort of activity holiday. I don't know if you would or you wouldn't, but it's like a hotel where all of the activities are included. So they have like sailing, windsurfing, kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding, road cycling, mountain biking, tennis.
So what have you been doing? How long have you been there for?
I've been there since Wednesday, so this is, I guess, day 5.
And what activities have you done so far from the list you just given?
I tried my hand at sailing, didn't really take to it that much. I've done a bit of windsurfing, which I might give another go tomorrow. Bit of kayaking, a bit of paddle tennis, which I do enjoy. That's quite nice. I've never played that before. A bit of tennis, and then road biking and mountain biking. But and it's interesting with the biking, and I know I texted you the other day after we did our cycle, and I was mentioning this to some guys. So we did I think about 40k was our cycle. We did it in about 2 hours, and it was, there was a fair hill and up and down, and I started 10 minutes after everyone else, so I had to chase the other 3 people. So I was by myself for a lot of it. So I was like, oh, I've got this hill to do. And then obviously I texted you and said, oh, we've just done this. It was probably my first real ride since 2017 when we did I can't remember what the trip was we did in 2017. Where was that?
Basel, Luxembourg, was that one? Barcelona, Bordeaux?
Maybe it was the Basel Bordeaux one. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I think it was the one where we had 2 nights somewhere.
Yeah, that was Bordeaux to Barcelona.
No, Bordeaux to Basel. It couldn't have been to Barcelona. That would be way too far.
Bordeaux. No, it was Bordeaux to Spain, wasn't it? Bilbao. Yeah, Bordeaux to Bilbao. And that was the last time I did a proper ride, other than like little jaunts here and there. And it was tough. And then I texted you and I was like, oh yeah, we did this ride. And you're like, we were talking about your Ironman half last time and you haven't done any training, you haven't been on a bike for like 8 months or whatever. And then you're like, yeah, I did this, which is really well done, by the way, for those listening. Nick did really well. I'm sure he'll tell us about it in a second. And you were like, oh yeah, you've done your ride, 90k in 2.5 hours, which is only about half an hour longer than it took us to do 40k. And I was like, wow. But I want to hear about you first before we talk about our topic of the day, which I think wanted to be about really expectations, shifting expectations, and also self-concept. So Carl Rogers coined this idea of the self-concept, which is your self-ideal, your self-image, and your self-esteem. And those 3 things make up your self-concept. And I want to talk a little bit about that because today or this week has been a bit of a realization for me in terms of physical stuff, which ties so closely into mental stuff. And I always say, like, you can't talk about mental health without talking about physical health. And this podcast is obviously not just about mindset or mental health. It's about health, longevity, vitality. Well, we've talked about those buckets in the past: spiritual health, emotional health, physical health. It all ties in, right? Health is not it's all those things combined if you want true health, right?
Exactly. So tell us about your weekend and your Staffordshire thing as well.
I'll tell you what, mate. You went to Greece on literally the hottest weekend the UK has had. I mean, didn't go to Greece for the weather because it was absolutely searing, roasting hot at the weekend. No, I'm well. You know what? I'm glad you wanted to talk about goals today for a couple of things because it's I didn't know, and
I should have known, and it shows how much we don't talk about it enough. And I'll get into our man in a minute, but it's Men's Mental Health Month, which I discovered today. And I thought, oh, well, let's talk about that. And then you said, well, I want to talk about goals and things like that. And I think it all kind of plays in. But I think also the fact I didn't know it was Men's Mental Health Month as a male who kind of operates in this space tells me that we're still not talking about it anywhere near enough. So I thought that might be something to talk about. But also because for me, that linked quite closely to my experience of Ironman. So Ironman 70.3 Stafford, went with a really good friend of mine called Neil Adamson, who absolutely smashed it as well, did really, really well. I've been coaching him towards the full, which he does in Vichy in August. And I was really anxious because I haven't been doing the training. I've had lots of stuff going on. Actually, my own mental health has been challenged, shall we say, over the last few months with things going on in my personal life, which I know you know about and don't necessarily going to bring it up in today's show, but there are things going on which has been quite challenging for me. My dad being one of those I've brought up on the show before, obviously got terminal cancer, and I've got teenagers and all the things that come with parenting and trying to manage a job where today I'm in a hotel, I'm away from my family again today, trying to manage training and my own goals, which are to do well at Ironman 70.3. And I really wanted this year to focus on 70.3 distance for me because I got to the World Champs last year, having not trained for that distance. So I thought this year, you know what, let's see how well I can go. But the reality is all the pressures of work, family, my dad, and everything else meant I haven't actually trained at all like I wanted to. So I was coming to this race, having signed up for it a year ago, thinking it was going to be a race I'd absolutely do really well at. I did well last year, but I'd do even better this year to see what I could do if I really trained for that distance. But I haven't done the training. Then I picked up a hip injury, which is haven't run for 4 weeks. And for someone who, if you've listened to the previous episodes, you'll know I have a bit of a fear of water. Which I think pretty much stems from my mum telling me when I was a kid that she had a recurring dream where I drowned in water, and she's always very fearful of me being anywhere near water. So every time I do an open water swim, there's a little bit of childlike fear that comes into my mind, right? And I've done one swim in 4 weeks to the distance. So again, I was like, I'm quite anxious. And I was with a friend of mine, Neil. He was, he's like, Nick, you've got this, you'll be fine. Anyway, going right up to the race, I was still anxious going into the water, but swimming absolutely fine. So that was the first thing, really happy. You come out and you kind of have this, I don't know, it's done. That kind of, it wasn't that bad after all moment, and I can crack on now with the race. And it put me in a really good mindset. And yeah, I did the bike, which I hadn't trained for. Bearing in mind, last year I trained all season for a 180-kilometer ride and I ended up beating last year's time, which really surprised me. So I did 90 kilometers in 2 hours 28, which for those that listen to this might be into cycling, that's averaging 36.4 kilometers an hour. For me, that's fast. That's the 4th fastest split in my age group. And I was delighted. But I came off the bike with no run training and a hip injury and the heat. I think all those things combined meant I had a really bad run. So I did a 1:47 half marathon and finished in 5 hours and 52 seconds. I didn't break the 5 hour mark. You know what I should have done? That was actually just bad planning. I thought I'd started 2 minutes later than I had. So I thought I was coming in 1 hour, 1 minute under. And then my wife went, no, you started 2 minutes early. You're going to come in 1 hour. That was just bad planning. But you know what? It was hot, super hot. We had people spraying us with hose pipes. The hip injury definitely had an impact, but I think that was more mental. Like I think I could have run through the discomfort, but it was a mental thing of going, I don't want to make it worse. Yeah. The heat gave me a nice excuse not to push it too hard. I knew I wasn't going to beat last year's time. And I don't think I had the motivation, knowing I wasn't going to do what I set out to do at the start of the year, to push through the pain barrier to get a better result. So that was disappointing. Yeah. It's always disappointing when you finish. You look back and go, I could have done better. And now the pain subsided. You think I could have pushed it harder. In the moment, though, I chose not to. I chose to safeguard what was an injury, but it wasn't so excruciating I had to stop, which makes me think maybe I could have pushed harder. I don't know. But it was a good race. And it was
easy again. I mean, the thing is, this is where we differ so much in like how we train, because I haven't done any races like since probably 2007. I did triathlon, an early sprint triathlon, not sprint, but the Olympic triathlon distance, I think 2005, 6 and 7. And what I found, and this is kind of part of the reason why I stopped actually, as I was going into 2006, 2007, I was doing less and less. So in 2005, I actually trained to do the Olympic triathlon thing distance. And then I didn't train in 2006, and I think I got better. And then 2007, I didn't train, but I just did a few events leading up to it, and I got even better. And then I was like, well, because I don't have the motivation to train, because I seem to be okay without it. Now, bearing in mind, I've just realised I was probably 29 when I did that last. And these rides, I did a ride yesterday, which was, like I said, 40 kilometers on the road. And then I did about 30 something kilometers on the mountain bike today. And my knee, actually, it was weird. First time it's been inflamed. So I felt my knee this morning. I can feel pockets of fluid in the knee.
Yeah.
I haven't felt since before I had the surgery, when the meniscus was still in there. Now they've removed part of the meniscus. It shouldn't inflame like that. And so I was dubious about the ride today. And I went to the ride. I thought it was just me and the guide that was doing it. And then a couple of other guys turned up, and they looked pretty fit as well. So we actually went at some pace. And normally it's an hour and a half ride they do to get to the place. And it was actually only an hour it took us. And then now back. And the hills were kind of brutal for me, actually. And you don't know this because you're always at the front on the hill. But when you see someone up the hill and they're just getting a little bit a bit further away, and then you tend to slow down a little bit as well, because you're getting a bit disheartened and things. And I was thinking to myself as well, like we were talking episodes ago about what we think to ourselves when we're going in. This time I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, right, these are the first 2 proper rides I've done. Mountain bike ride, probably first one since 2007, other than going around the local park on my mountain bike, but proper mountain bike. And then the first road bike since 2017, when we did that Bordeaux to Bilbao. So actually, I haven't done a ride in my 40s at all. And I'm like, suddenly I feel that gap. And I'm not sure a lot of that's going to be psychological, but I think, I need to actually do some training. I was thinking, I've resolved myself, if we ever do our 10th cycle next year, I'm gonna have to do some training or join a club or something.
I think that's where this race has been quite valuable to me in various ways. When you look at reflection, right, and whether you gently reflect on a coaching session about business or about our life or whatever, I'm reflecting on the race, as you often do, and you think where you tend to naturally think about things you could have gone better, and things, injury being an example. Could I pushed a bit harder? But actually, it's made me reflect on a few different things. One is I've really surprised myself on the cycle. So how much is actually ingrained and inside you that you're able to maintain even without the training? So I think that was really good for me, kind of the memory piece, the muscle memory of being able to... Yeah. I've been staying on a watt bike, so it's not like I haven't done anything, but to beat last year's performance in that heat as well was a really nice surprise. So that was a good thing. So I kind of still got it kind of thing, whatever. But then last year, every race I did was under 5 hours. This one wasn't. And actually, as my wife said, you did really well. You haven't done the training. You've been injured. Don't worry about it. You've done really well. And pre-race, I said I'd have taken 5:10 to 5:20. That's fine with no training. When you're 52 seconds short of going under, it's almost more disappointing than being 10 minutes over.
I think that's what you did last week, though. You said if you did
exactly. But this is a great example of where comparison takes your joy away. And I've talked about the comparison. I'm comparing the race now to what I did last year when I did a lot more training. And then I'm realizing, so it's a positive thing, because I'm realizing that's taking my enjoyment out of my result, because I'm trying to compare it to last year. But last year I was a different athlete. I'd done more training. So I should really be delighted with the time I've got. And I think that's sinking in now. I'm happier now than I probably was at the moment. And that's I'm starting to realize that actually I did really well for the level of training I'd done. I am quite happy with that result. And there's a couple of things that's really easy to take for granted, right? So one is, you talked about not training. Well, actually last year when I was in the water, very sadly and tragically, somebody died in the water. In front of me, I got held up I didn't see the guy going under, but I was held up in the water as the lifeboat came out and tried to save the guy. Unfortunately, he died. So there was a chance for tragedy in any race like that when you're out of your depth and you're doing long distance events. There was a guy that died at Ironman Hamburg last week. So these things can happen. So I've come through unscathed. I've come through without any further injury. I've come through without any accidents, in searing heat, finished the race in a time that was better than I thought I'd actually do, even though it was just shy of the 5 hour mark. So I should be really happy about that. My cycling's impressed me, so I'm happy with that. Yeah. Came through with a friend of mine who I've been coaching, who absolutely blitzed it. And actually he did it on a very dodgy bike that really needed some service, which we realised in reflection. His handlebar stock had come loose and he was cycling with a handlebar.
I've had that before. Terrible.
Been doing that at 30, when you're averaging 34, 35 kilometers an hour and for the whole race across some interesting terrain, I thought, well, he did really well. So and I had a whole chance to be away with my family and enjoy it. So there was loads to enjoy. And then linking all that to what you wanted to talk about, which were goals and how they have to change. Well, actually, my goals have had to change. I was going to go for an amazing time beating last year. That hasn't happened. And I'm okay with that. I had to change my goals because I changed my training. So I have to have different expectations. I'm not going to go to the Worlds this year. I possibly could have got a place because I came 8th. But that my goal was to qualify legitimately, which I think it has to be top 5. And then you roll down 3 places. I didn't do that, so that's okay. I'm accepting of that. My goals have to change. goals can change based on circumstance. And actually, if you'd asked me last week when we recorded last time, would I take 5 hours, 52 seconds? I'd have said absolutely on the level of training I've got, and that would have been an amazing result. So, it's just interesting when you reflect on things, you know, critical of ourselves, and actually I should be really happy.
For me as well, I think in my, you know, talking about expectations and them changing, and is that my expectation, and it has been probably for a long time, probably 10 years, it's all my training is not performance driven, it's longevity driven. So it's like, and then but part of me, when I was cycling with these guys today, who, you know, one was 5 years younger, one 10 years younger, another one 20 years younger. So yes, I'm a bit older than some of them, but you know, the ego comes in a little bit, and I'm like, oh, you know, I want to keep up, I want to kind of beat them. And yesterday I was cycling, and they were older. I think one was 50 something, one was I think 61, and only took up cycling 3 years ago. And I was fine up the hills with these guys. I mean, it was fine, but it just got me thinking. And this whole trip actually is quite interesting because I'm pretty young here by comparison. The others are all in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, and they're actually pretty active, right? They're playing tennis, although everyone's got the creaking. It's funny because it's creaky knees, very slow doubles games, and so I don't play tennis, so I can cope pretty well with playing tennis with them because I've never really played it before. But
is that the same as pickleball, the racket?
No, paddle tennis is different from pickleball, I think. But I was playing both paddle tennis, which is kind of a cross between tennis and squash, like in a box, which is a little bit, and smaller courts are way easier to get around, and then also doubles tennis. And I just felt like it's quite inspiring seeing people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, move around and do things. But at the same time, I'm also thinking my expectations of performance have changed massively. And I just want to be able to be, you know, active like that in 60s, 70s, 80s. There's a guy actually here I had dinner with, 83 years old. He's blind, actually. He goes out on the sailing boat all the time.
Amazing.
Gets around and stuff. But yeah, so that was one thing. But also where I was talking about, I think it's Carl Rogers, who was the 20th century philosopher. Is it Carl Rogers or psychotherapist? In the same cohort as Sigmund Freud. And he came up with this, I think it was him, he came up with this thing called the self-concept, which is made up of 3 things. And actually, this all drives your beliefs and thoughts. And you always talk about the thoughts and living in the shadow of things.
Feelings in shadow thought.
Yeah, feelings living in the shadow of thoughts and things. Now, your self-concept is made up of 3 things, and that is your self-image, so that's how you see yourself, your self-ideal, how you would like to see yourself, and then your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. And we have a different self-concept for every aspect of a life, even in different bits of the same activity. For example, you could have a self-concept about what it's like to swing a golf club off the tee, and then a different self-concept about putting, right? How you see yourself in that situation. Sure. And for me, I've always seen myself as quite fit, quite active. And then I'm starting to, you know, the last few years in particular, since the injuries, feel that I'm not moving in the same way as I think in my head. I remember one time, actually, this is a funny example about self-ideal versus self-image. When I was doing my yoga teacher training, we had to videotape ourselves doing the routine and then send it in. Now, there's one move which you're probably familiar with, downward dog. Now, there's downward dog. It's one of the only moves I do know. Yeah, so downward dog, where you're in an upside down V shape, like hands and feet on the floor, and then there's a 3-legged version where you've got one leg up, right? So so one of your legs goes up towards the sky, and in my head, I see my leg going, you know, straight up towards like the top of the corner of a room. And then when I videotape myself and I watch it down, it's like it's barely a foot off the ground, but it feels like it's all the way up. Like, so how and actually it's good. I've got a positive self-image a lot of the time when we think, or self-ideal.
I've got that when I play football with my kids. So my Leo, who's never shown any interest in football whatsoever, probably because I put him off it because I'm such a football fan. I think he just said, Daddy's always watching football, therefore I don't like the sport. But he's suddenly come back from school and goes, I want to be a footballer now. And he's suddenly into it. But he's not a natural footballer at this moment. I think everyone else has been into it longer than him. So he's catching up. So I was like, let's go play football. And I played a relatively good level of football as a kid, right? I was religiously into my football, played for teams all the time, relatively good standard. And then in my head, I'm still as good as I was then, but I haven't kicked a football in about 10 years. I've got hernia in both groins, which basically stopped me from playing, which I never got sorted out. Doesn't impact my running, doesn't impact my cycling, but does impact me playing football. So I went back with it, thinking I could still do the Cruyff, all the Cruyff turns and the double step overs. Nah, I literally fall over. I try and teach him how to strike a football, and I end up ballooning it nowhere near where it's supposed to go. And I was like, this is not how it used to be. In my head, I'm still as good as I was then. In reality,
I think we're all like that. My friends are like that as well. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm still like that with sprinting. I'm like, I haven't sprinted since I was like 16 or something. I'm like, yeah, I can still sprint really fast, but no, I don't even give it a go now. And I think like that comes to the idea of like shifting your goals and your expectations. And I think I've said before that my goal is to do effectively the OAP Olympics, which is not an actual Olympic event, but whereby I'm strong enough that I can put my luggage in the overhead locker, right, in the airplane. I can go up and down the stairs, no problem. I can get up from the floor, no problem. And I want to be independent, especially like my parents have gone to Cyprus this last week, and my dad is really quite immobile, and I'm really proud that he's managed to get out there, because they had to go 2 flights of stairs to get up to the to the flat, and he's only, I think, going up and down once a day, and he didn't the first couple of days, and he has yet to go in the water. He's gone as far as the beach, and I think my mum has put a chair in the water's edge, and he sat there, but I don't know why he hasn't gone all the way in. But I look at that, and I love my dad for many, many reasons. And at the same time, I use some of the things that I really didn't like about his habits to inspire me. So he smoked for 40 years, which I think I mentioned before.
Yeah, so did my dad.
Same with your dad, did you say?
Yeah.
And so I can't even contemplate that, right? And he stopped drinking quite a bit now, actually, but he was drinking like a bottle of whiskey a week for up until he got into hospital recently, and then it was turkey for about 2 months, and now I think he's back to wine. But there's certain things like, and he hasn't really ever exercised as long as I've ever known him, and things like that. And so those things I take as things I want to do the opposite of, and everything. And for me, I would love to some degree do some activities like you do, like do the races and that. But at the same time, it's not a strong enough pull for me.
I think one thing that's really important, though, right? And I realised this in the race itself, and actually, sadly, I only really realised it in the last probably 200 meters of the finish line, right? To this moment. But I saw Leo, who's my son. He's 9 years old, and he'd moved down the crowd away from my wife, and he saw me, and he wanted to run alongside me. There was me, a little bit miserable, that I realised I wasn't going to go under 5 hours. I was in a bit of pain. It was so hot, I can't even tell you. And anyone was out the weekend, it was searingly hot running in those conditions after being out for 5 hours in the heat. And then I was in my own head of going, I haven't done the time, all the things. The thing about goals is you've got to be open to reevaluating and adjusting them. Like sometimes we get very fixated on achieving certain things, so they become so much that they become rigid. And actually, I knew by that point, I already knew I wasn't going to beat last year's time. I already knew I wasn't going to get to the World Championships within the first top 5 place at this point. And I'd already reevaluated those goals in my mind. So seeing him run, actually, the bigger goal in all of this, because they're all self-centered things for me as she, but actually what I really want to be as a dad is inspirational to my kids. So seeing Leo in that moment for the last 200 yards, that brought the biggest smile back to my face that I had the whole race, because he ran alongside me, and that was just a little telltale sign. No word spoken, still done through body language. Him running alongside me along the crowd, and he was on the pavement because there's all barriered, and running along behind all the people, telling me, Daddy, I'm here, watching. That's all the inspiration you need, because he's watched me, stayed in the searing heat himself in the sun just to see me at the end, and he wants to run alongside me and show that he can do it too. End of the race, he's already telling me he wants to do an Ironman. He wants to do triathlons when he's older. That's what the motivation. That's way more intrinsic than actually me going to do, that's all self-centered stuff, what I might achieve or going under 5 hours. The much more important stuff is the Leo piece. So that when you were talking about that certainly struck me as something that's really important, and that's going to stand hopefully the test of time, and that will lead him now to having goals that he wants to be fit and achieve more and run and play football, whatever. But in your example with your dad as well, I think a lot of people and ourselves, because we all suffer this sometimes, but a fixed mindset can be really damaging, where we think we can't achieve something. So that downward dog example, people look at you doing that in a video and go, well, I could never do that. Well, actually, you can. That's a fixed mindset of saying I can't do something, but we can all adjust. We can all learn. And those that have a growth mindset, those that are willing to adjust and learn and adapt and be flexible to what they believe they can or cannot do, they're much more likely to achieve the things that you want to do, which is be able to pick that suitcase up, put it in the overhead locker when you're 85 years old, because you've got that mindset to want to learn, adjust, and do what you need to do to make that happen.
You have to think about as well, is the juice worth the squeeze in the case? Because, like, for example, the sailing the other day, and even the windsurfing, I'm like, okay, this is a new skill. There's that kind of learning curve, that frustration. And I'm like, do I really want to invest in this? Do I really want to do it? And for the sailing, probably not, although I'm not sure I had the best boat and the best tuition with it all. And the blind guy was saying to me, oh no, you shouldn't have gone in that boat actually. And everything, it wasn't the best one for you. And so maybe another time I'll do that. But I was thinking, do I really want to spend my time learning to windsurf or learning to do this when I like doing other things as well? And there's only so many things you can do. But I guess it's also, in your son's example, you and Leo's example, it's like, what is the overarching goal of anything that we're doing, right? It's, for me, it's to be happy, healthy, live independently.
It's not the goal, it's the why. So if the sailing, if the curve isn't worth it, if the why isn't strong enough to learn to do it, then you're not going to want
exactly.
to do it.
And I probably would do more of that if I was out with someone that I wanted to hang out with and they wanted to do it, then by all means I would do it. If I'm going out there by myself, I'm like, I'm not really that bothered to do that. Same with the mountain biking today. Like, one of the guys, there was 4 of us, and I was suffering a bit on the last hill, and the other guy who was with me, and he's a road cyclist, so fitness is all right. He likes his hills. He didn't like going down them actually, but he was very slow going down. But uphill was fine, and he was edging off a little bit. And I said, "Oh, if you want to go off, go off." And he's like, "No. I mean, the whole point of him coming on this cycle with everyone else is because to hang out, right? So you chat on the way up the hill as well, which makes it even harder. But like, the point of me going on these cycle trips is to hang out with people, not to best everyone and get cane it up the hill and be by yourself for like 5 minutes. That's not really worth it. And I don't know, your goal is to inspire Leo or whatever.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about goals today, I mean, 2 things come to mind there. One is we need to be able to, well, the why is really important to anything, right? If you don't know why you're doing something, it's unlikely we're going to want to do it, but it doesn't ever mean it's too late. I'll give a great example. So my dad, I talk about him a lot because I love him dearly and he's got terminal cancer, and I like to see the decisions he's making. He's decided to learn the bass guitar. He's sadly probably never going to get to the level of being in a band or doing it or any of that stuff because of his illness. But he still always wanted to play. So for him, the why is strong enough to do it. So the first thing I'd say is, regardless of age, and often we say we're too old, it's too late. It's never too late to learn anything if you have enough want to do it. That's the first thing. And my dad has shown me that. And he's teaching me that right now by wanting to play the bass guitar. Fantastic. He's just got himself some private lessons to try and learn to play something before a pass at the end of August. Fab. Love that. Second thing is, I think we need to give ourselves more compassion to ourselves. We can be really compassionate people towards others, but sometimes we're really hard on ourselves. And I'm certainly one of those people who can be really hard on myself. My wife will tell you that I like to self-torture when I don't, I beat myself up for not doing certain things. But actually, we need to learn. And I certainly need to learn. I'm vulnerable to this, definitely, which I need to be more compassionate. Beating myself up about doing an Ironman, whatever, arguably the why wasn't strong enough for me. That's why I didn't get the result I wanted. The why just wasn't there this year. Other things going on. So I had to reassess. The why should have been what it ended up being, which I only really realized in the last 200 meters of a 5-hour race, was there to inspire my kids. That why is strong enough for me to want to do it again. 100%. I've got another race in Vichy. Great. I've now got a reason which I can focus on of making sure they enjoy the experience. I enjoy it. I've got a why and a reason to be there. But I was questioning the why throughout. I mean, when you're under circumstance of dehydration, it's really hot. There's lots of reasons you would question why on earth you're out there in that heat doing it, right? But I only need that one sight from my son and my daughter and my wife watching me and cheering me on. That's enough for me to, that's what it's all about. It's all about family and inspiring them and being part of a supportive network, which I was in. So showing more compassion to each other and ourselves when it's difficult. I don't think we do that enough. Typically as humans, we're really hard on ourselves.
We are. I mean, now for me, so much of my identity is tied into my physical experience as well. And to tie this into mental health as well, it's Mental Health Awareness Week for men. I remember just how when I've been injured in the past, I become way more depressed, as it were, because my whole identity is around actually physically being able in some way, which is really, like, interesting. And so when I'm not, it plays into who I feel I am as a person a lot of the time. And I remember, and I'm not sure where this comes back to, I just remember years ago, I think I was at school, I was probably about 14 or 13. And I've always had quite an athletic body. And I've been, I guess, genetically blessed somewhat with a bit of a six pack. And I had that since, I don't know, 10, 11 years old, something like that. And I remember people saying, oh, you've got a really good body and all that. And probably it's girls as well. So it kind of ties into this thing. And I'm like, and I've maintained that throughout my 20s. Like people say, it doesn't count if you've got a six pack in your teens or your 20s. It's only when you get to 30 or 40 if you can maintain it. And so I've always had that physical identity and mental identity wrapped up together. And so when I kind of get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm not as physically able as my self-ideal says I can be, caning up. Because also when we used to do our cycle trips, I'd come on those trips, no training. And I'm kind of up there. I'm not at the top of the pack, but I'm up there with the top half. But I don't do the training. And now I'm like, oh, suddenly something has to shift because my ideal and my image are not matching up.
Question for you. You might know some research on this. And it's just popped up into my mind as you're talking there about some of your goals in terms of physical health. And I think I have the same one. I don't know if there's any research or science that may relate to this, and you may be able to tell me if there is or not. I'm not leading here because I've got no idea whether there is or not. Right. But whether this links back to the male hunter-gatherer element, that we need to be physical, we need to be the strong person in a partnership relationship in order to attract the opposite partner, whatever that might be. And I don't know, because I think we've moved on from that, but somewhere innately it's there. And the reason I highlight that is I read some interesting stats in relation to food eating disorders. Right, I've been reading some and listening to some interesting podcast stuff on it. And when it comes to boys or adolescents and teenagers, males who struggle with things like bulimia or anorexia, nervosa, things like that, it's nearly always, I say nearly always, based on the things that I've listened to, which is limited. It's only this week's kind of reading. It's because they want their six-pack abs. And I've even got my 9-year-old son going, Dad, I want to have a six-pack, right? So they end up stripping and they end up sweating and they end up doing gyms and weights because of that six-pack ab thing. It just popped into my head because you mentioned that exact phrase, six-pack abs. I mean, as men, we feel like we need to be physical and strong, and therefore we put ourselves under this pressure. And we talk about mental health at the moment. Well, actually, suicide for men is a huge killer. I think it's
a leading cause. It's a leading cause of death in men 16 to 40.
Yeah. I read some stats today because it's obviously Men's Mental Health Week. I can't remember what they were. Yeah. Massive percentage.
It is. I mean, I think for me, it's less about. I guess because it's more about when I, like, let's say, had a six pack. I didn't realize it was a thing, right? So but it's part of my identity, I guess. I was watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger Netflix documentary thing, 3 episodes. I think you quite like it, actually. It's worth a watch. But he was talking about.
I'm always worried by your recommendations based on your film.
It's interesting, but right. He was talking about, obviously his whole first career was all about body and bodybuilding, and he's like saying, and you're getting older. He's 75 now, and he's like, he's seeing flappy things here and there, and he's like, oh, I wonder if anything can be done about that. And I think it's not a vanity thing as such as it is a change thing, that we're like an aging or a changing thing.
You don't think it's a vanity thing?
I don't think so.
Men generally are afraid to show vulnerability. There's a stigma about men crying still, about men being vulnerable.
I don't think it's, for me, it's a vanity thing.
Not for you. Well, are you talking about for you personally or for men generally?
I'm not going to talk about men generally.
Okay.
But I will say that for me, it's more of it's when you look at yourself in the reflection and you see something different than you've used to for like 40 years or 45 years, you start, it's like you're shifting your identity as opposed to, it's for vanity.
That links to your concept piece earlier, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So basically internal conflict happens when your self-ideal and your self image don't really match up, where you've got an idea of how you want to behave or how you want to be in like a certain race or whatever. So you had a self-ideal in that race of coming under 5 hours. Your self-image was actually 5 hours something. And so there was that conflict initially about that. So I think for me, it's how do I see myself, and if I'm not seeing what I expect to be seeing, then there becomes a conflict. And I guess because I'm used to looking and feeling a certain way, and I still see that in my head, a bit like your football example, where you might not have done something for 15, 20 years, in your memory, you still see it, you being able to do that thing. And then when you can't do that thing, it throws into question about, okay, so what else, how else am I different? How else do I not know myself, or something like that?
I'll tell you something where I've changed, and this isn't the first time either. And I talk about men not being vulnerable enough, but vulnerability is also contagious. If we show vulnerability, others will be vulnerable. And actually, I did a race with a guy called Neil, who's equally accepting of being vulnerable like I am in this instance, because we both kind of had the same reaction, which I thought was really interesting. We're both parents, and whether that's got a part to play or not, I think it probably does. So I've done lots of events playing football, for example, won a game, whatever. I've never cried at the end of winning a football match as a kid or as an adult or whatever. But as a parent, even though this is what the third, seventh or eighth Ironman event I've done, having Leo run with me for the last 200 meters, I finished that race completely spent and then cried. And that's, I don't mind saying I'm 42 years old. No real reason to cry, in inverted commas, except for the fact I think the why hit me like a ton of bricks as I saw him running. He didn't even see me. So it wasn't for anyone else but for me, because you go into a finisher's tent and when nobody knows you because they're all just doing their own thing. And I just cried. I just had a little, it was just a well of emotion. And obviously you're spent, so there's nothing that, even me saying that sounds like I'm trying to justify. It's interesting. I'm listening to myself speak. I'm saying it was because I was spent. But I did. I just finished and cried. For whatever reason, tears came through and I was like, it just really emotional at the end of the race. And then maybe it was because I was fully spent physically. Maybe it was because Leo rushed and I found my why in the last 200 meters of the entire race. Maybe it was just because I'm glad I was out of the heat. I don't really know. I can't even give you the full reason. I just know it was overwhelming. I finished and just cried. But I don't know if I would have done years ago before I was a parent or before I'd got over myself to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have cried. I don't know if I'd have suppressed it either. I don't think it would have been such a natural reaction to it. And what I thought was really interesting is Neil finished, and I saw him because I was already in the tent. He came in, and he was almost in the same state. He had a bit of a quiet, and we spoke about it. I was like, God, I felt the same way. He's like, yeah, he goes, I always have a quiet end of the race. I was like, well, this is a guy who I look at going, he's a real manly guy, right? He's a strong individual, and that shouldn't come into my mindset of me looking at him as being strong, and therefore I shouldn't expect it.
I mean, I remember
tied in, but there's still a stigma or a physical.
No. I felt like there was less of a stigma ever since Gazza's tears in 1990. I remember that as being the moment for me personally where I felt society accepted men crying in public. Was Gazza's tears in 1990. It was
certainly, yes. I hadn't actually made the connection, but certainly a historic moment, right?
There was that, and then there was also hugs. So hugs between men. It's I don't know whether it was Friends, maybe the TV series, or I think it might have been earlier. It might have been Miami Vice or somewhere like that. I think it was Miami Vice. I remember watching some weird program about 80s shows, and I never watched Miami Vice with Don Johnson in the 80s, but I think they were very huggy. And it gave permission for like straight guys to hug each other. And I've always been used to that with not actually my English mates so much, but a lot of my other friends, like Indian friends and Greek friends, hugging each other when we greet each other, as opposed to handshakes or whatever. I think it's less so now. I think I hug everyone, but I never thought that was weird, I guess, because also in Greek culture, we're a little bit more hands-on than maybe English culture. But certainly apparently it was 80s and 90s that started to shift a little bit, and it became okay and permission for men to be able to express emotions in certain ways. And I think there's still, to a certain degree, a stigma around that, because like you were asking before about the research and everything else, when you go into that tribal hunter-gatherer mode, you do have to be, as a man, have certain responsibilities, going out hunting, protecting the women, and all of these traditional roles, which are somewhat being, I guess, questioned at the moment to some degree. But there was that idea, and I think if you didn't fit in, if you didn't perform your role, then you could be ostracized by the group. You could be seen to be not adding value to the group. And so I think as a man, we feel innate somewhere that we have to be strong and protectors.
Isn't that where the mental health issues arise, when you try and suppress something? I appreciate you might get chucked out of the group now, but in modern society where we don't have maybe such pressure to be that.
So are you saying we suppressing our innate ability, our innate desire to be able to do that, or we suppress it?
I think that a lot of the mental health issues that men have is because we're trying to suppress how we truly feel. Like there's a fear that if you want to cry, but we don't, so we hold it in. I think if you hold anything in, eventually it manifests itself in a way that we don't want it to, and it builds. Often if you go into, let's say you have a road rage issue, or you're in a supermarket and someone just loses their shit, right? And we've all seen it. It's very rarely that particular moment that actually is the reason they've lost their shit and gone.
Yeah.
Male, female, or indifferent. It's a build-up of loads of things that have happened, and that's the straw that's broke the camel's back. And I think with men's mental health in particular, and I say this as a man, Lucy will say, my wife will say to me, I just hold things in, I build and build and build, and then it just goes. And I don't know why we do that. We know that it's just not healthy. We need to
something that's quite relevant
to network and be able to talk about stuff. And we know that one of the best cures for mental health issues is the ability to talk openly about stuff and be without fear of judgment.
This is what I wanted to say. So on my cycle ride yesterday, we stop off somewhere, and in Greece there's a big gaffaneo culture, right? Cafe culture, and you might have seen it if you've come to Greece, where all the old men basically they spend all day sitting in these cafes drinking coffee and chatting and smoking. And I was saying that is their therapy, that is their connection, right? And I don't know into how much detail they go and they chat around things, but that's where they go typically. Like the women have their own thing that they do, and they talk and they get things off. Now I think because society now is so isolated, where we are effectively depend, if you have a romantic partner, you depend on them for everything, to be the parent of your children, your lover, your best friend, your confidant, your therapist, and everything. And actually we used to have different roles. So the place we are in now, island of Lesbos, is lots of little villages a lot of the time, and these villages sometimes they know each other, they're hanging out every day, and they're going through their troubles and they're talking through their troubles, and they're generally very fit. We met this 85-year-old guy yesterday, and he was walking up and down these hills. He's never left the island. He's been there his whole life since the war or something. And they have this community and they do talk to each other. And it might not necessarily be to the level that we're talking about now in terms of deep, darkest vulnerability. But because I don't know if it ever gets to that point, because they're constantly going to be chatting. They may be coming in and say, "Oh, you never get this idiot." Just
what? I don't know if you remember.
Or my wife said this or whatever,
You helped me with something, and if I can give if anyone's listening to this, particularly if you're men, or if you're going through a situation, it doesn't matter if you're male or not, actually, it's an irrelevance in this example, because, and I'll bring it back to my dad, because obviously a very prevalent thing in my mind. I think about him all the time, and he's dealing with this illness. And I didn't want to have any, regrets of anything being unsaid. And actually, I don't know if you remember, because it was a few weeks ago now, I told you about what I planned to do. I maybe even mentioned on the podcast, I can't remember. But you gave me a list of questions that you can ask anyone.
Oh, yes, I did.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll let you refer to what those questions come from, because they come from someone else. But I said to you, I don't want to leave anything unsaid, and I want to go and just have. My dad is a farmer by trade, and I remember him being this strong as an ox guy who was constantly fencing or dealing with calving and a big cow, whatever. Strong, very manual, very hands-on, very practical guy, and always the common sense in the family that if I need to ask someone for guidance, he'd be the one I go to, and he'd give me that practical man advice in that instance. But actually, that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to go and see him. We bought a bottle of whiskey. His favourite drink is scotch. So I bought a bottle of scotch. I invited my sister, so I didn't make it a manly thing. So my sister come and joined us. And I asked you, because we had a conversation separately. You gave me a list of about 30 questions of things to ask.
Yeah.
And I said to my dad, I'm going to come down. Right, it's going to be you, me, and my sister's going to join. And I'm going to ask you some questions. Some are going to be challenging. Some are not going to be. We're going to drink the entire bottle of whiskey. All right, and we're going to get drunk and we're going to get emotional. And I'm going to tell you now in advance, I'm going to cry like a baby, because I'm going to talk to my dad about some stuff that's really going to be close to home. And it started as a bit of fun. My mum joined as well. So actually all four of us were there. My mum, my dad, my sister and me. And we drank the entire bottle. I probably drank the most, I'll be honest. We started with lots of laughter. We used your questions, which were great. We didn't end up going through all of them. It was a great platform to start the conversation. And we just reminisced. And I found out stuff. So some of the questions were like, Dad, what was your best memory as a child growing up with your parents? Stuff that I never knew before. What was your first girlfriend before you met mum? All that kind of stuff. We had all those questions. And by the end of it, like, my dad isn't someone that typically cries either, although scotch can get the tear ducts moving. And they did. And we all had a really good cry. And it was really cathartic. Like the following day, my mum said my dad had been quite low. It's like, my God, my dad's energy today, even though he's hungover, was really good. You really lightened it. Had a really good conversation. And I feel like now, God, heaven forbid anything happens, but I feel like now we've had that evening.
Yeah.
We got everything out. We had a good chat. We talked about stuff that really matters. And it was great to have a cry in front of my sister. And yet I feel like in our family, sometimes I'm the guy that has to be in inverted commas, the strong one. They often rely on me for different bits and pieces. And that's fine. I don't mind playing that role. But actually didn't in this particular instance, I was just being vulnerable and open. And it was most, I don't know, cathartic. I don't know if that's the right word, but a really lovely experience. And you really helped me with that because you gave me the question.
We don't often talk to our parents about real things or find out real things about them because, you know, we grew up with them, we're teenagers or whatever, and we're always annoyed with our parents or embarrassed with our parents. And they're trying to get us to do something. So we don't actually sit down and have these deep conversations. And when I did mine with my dad, I think it was must have been at least 4 or 5 years ago because we did it in Cyprus and I haven't been to Cyprus for 4 or 5 years and I videotaped it. I still need to do the same conversation with my mum, but I've got it videotaped and I sent it to my sisters and stuff. And it was just a nice way of getting to know them. And also, I think we asked some of the questions are like, you know, what's the advice you would give, and you name one of the siblings or whatever. It is. And it's just kind of nice, and they like brings them back to being youthful, and their memory goes back to being younger as well. And there's a different energy about them. So yeah, the questions I think I got from a guy called Brendan Bouchard, who I think asked his dad before his dad passed away those questions, and I'd always meant to ask my dad that as well. So that's why
you gave me some good advice because I was reluctant at first. I don't know if you remember, Harry, because I didn't want it to be like a final thing. But if I do this, I'm always promoting the inevitable. And you're like, Nick, if you don't do it and the final thing happens, you'll live there with the regret of not doing it. And that made total sense. And we've done it. And I'm really glad that we have. But even from a mental health perspective, from my own mental health, worrying about all the unsaid things and the unthing, you don't want to lose someone and not know something that was really important to them.
Yeah.
I feel like for my own mental health, hopefully it was really good for my dad's as well, because he got to experience that with me and my sister and my mum, and it was a really safe space to do so. And I think actually when you're showing vulnerability, you do need a psychologically safe space to do that. So it's really important we're able to identify who our people are, who our community are, that can give us that support. And actually that's the same even if you're going back to the goals conversation. If you've got a goal you want to achieve, it's really, I would say, I would always recommend identifying who that support network is to help you achieve that goal, who's going to be there through thick and thin. If you are hit with an injury or whatever it is your goal that's going to knock you off path, they can guide you back or help you or comfort you. So I think they're relevant in both examples. But it was, you just said, and actually for you typically you are more procrastinating than I am. That's probably an unfair word for you. You like to plan. I like to go, go, go. In this instance, it was you saying, Nick, go, 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 and me going, oh, it just feels a bit like final. And I did do it, and I'm so glad that I did. Yeah.
I think that's, it's a nice story for people to hear. And I think a lot of time as men, the problem is we don't talk enough about real stuff sometimes, I think. And I think that can be, like we were saying, if that builds up within you, who knows what can happen. I mean, one of my friends, we talked about the leading cause of death being suicide between 16 and 24. A friend of actually mine and Joe's, and so he was slightly closer with Joe than me, but I'd known him since I was 7 years old.
Yeah.
He tragically, he died when we were all 27, and we later found out a few days later from his parents that it was a suspected, I guess, suicide. He was found, I think it was hanging, but we're not 100% sure whether it was a prank gone wrong or whether it was genuine suicide. But I remember his parents, because I found out on the Friday, and then they invited us around on the Monday, and then they told us what happened on the Monday. But I remember them saying, make sure you talk to people, talk about something. And I actually didn't heed their advice that often, because there have been times in the last sort of 15 years, 16 years since that happened, or actually maybe 18 years since that happened, 2005, I think it happened, that I felt kind of like pretty low. And then I still didn't feel comfortable like necessarily opening up and talking about it. And I'm not sure if that's because I wasn't comfortable talking about it, or whether it's because there wasn't anything definitive to say. It was just like this feeling, if that makes sense, as opposed to
it does.
oh, I don't know, I've lost my job and this is happening. It's just like, it's like I'd be talking and talking for an hour with that person and still not really be able to articulate. Now, I've got other friends who I know who've been very like down and depressed, and they could probably resonate. But they,
I've got a similar experience. It links to what you were talking about in the last episode. You know, where we talk about, I'll call it a sixth sense now, but the idea where we can feel things in our gut or that second brain, and it's no, it's really hard to explain it. So, tragically, I've also been in a situation where a female friend of mine, and actually probably. I can't think of many other examples, but one of the only times I probably until that moment in my life, when I'd have been 19 years oldish, where I cried openly in public without any alcoholic or any kind of, it's just a natural tears streaming, just come naturally in a public setting. And that was when, and it was the sixth sense thing will come in, and I cannot explain it. It was a tragic event. A really close friend of mine at university I was with her at the time, and her dad turned up at university unexpected. Now, I don't know what had gone on in that moment beforehand, but she took one look at him and she immediately fell to her knees and just broke down. And the energy, nothing had been spoken at that point. She wasn't expecting to see him, but she knew what had happened before he said a single word. And the moment, the energy, my friend Matt was there as well. Both of us were in tears, and we didn't know why either. We were just sensing the energy. Turned out, tragically, that her mum had committed suicide, and he was there to tell her. And when he came close and gave her the news, she already knew. He was already on her knees, devastated, and yet he hadn't actually officially given her the news at that point. And we were there as bystanders, equally in tears before we knew the news, because we were just in the reaction of what she had. We knew it was something really tragic, and I can't explain it. I can't. I would argue potentially it was probably what the first little valve turning in me, that when you've cried once in public like that, it just gets a little bit easier the next time, and and each time the valve gets slightly more turned, because there's no judgment, or it wasn't about me in that moment. But I remember then after that, that's probably my first real memory of crying in a public setting where I had no control. It just came, and there was no words were spoken. It was inappropriate no one knew what to say, to be honest, except comfort. But I'm just linking it to what you were saying, where it's there's that energy, emotionality that I can't explain what it was.
And we know, and we're connected. We know, and you just sense it. I mean, I find myself, I don't know if I cry a huge amount in public, but I do cry quite often when I really feel emotionally invested in. Say I'm watching something and it relates to something that might be going on in my life, and it might not even be a particularly serious problem. I remember the first time this happened, actually. It was really random. I was on a bus in Australia traveling from Sydney to Brisbane or something like that. And I haven't still to this day watched this entire movie, but it's called Stepmom, I think, with Julia Roberts maybe and someone else, Susan Sarandon. And I have no idea what aspect of it. I think it's because I've been away from home as well for like a year by that stage, and it was to do with mums and things like that. But I just started bawling out on the back of this bus for some reason. And I still have never watched this entire movie, and I only watched about 10 minutes of it there. But I sometimes I'm quite empathetic a lot of the time, or I can connect with the emotional feelings of other spaces and people around me sometimes. And then I started, and I cry quite often with just these random things. And it just reminds me of, I'm a big fan of Friends, the TV show Friends, and there's an episode where it says Chandler can't cry, and he discovers, the team discovers, or the group discovers, he can't cry. But then once he does cry, he's suddenly crying at a TV commercial or this and the other. And
that sounds like me.
I will cry every month about something. Like I'll be watching something and I'll feel connected in some way, shape, or form with what's going on, and have a tear in my face.
We flew to Denver, obviously, recently, because we talked about it on the show, and we went to Denver. And I haven't told you this story, but it's true. So we had two guys. I flew with two friends, Abu and Tom, and they pretty much just slept the whole way through. And I was in the middle of an aisle, so obviously middle of a set of three seats. So me and him, I can't get out. And two people either side are kind of half falling asleep, and I decided to watch movies. And I watched the movie Son. So it's a relatively new movie.
With Hugh Jackman, I have not seen.
That's right, and the child's got suicidal thoughts, and I won't ruin the movie, but it's if you're a parent, it's quite. And I was in the middle of this aisle, genuinely in first, and I had two people next to me, like, not really know what's going on, because they're kind of half asleep, waking up, not really checking what movie I'm on. And I'm just in the middle, and I've got tears. They are streaming. The woman comes over, and I'm like, it's fine, I'm okay, I'm just watching a movie. But honestly, they're absolutely streaming. And Tom and Moo at the end, sorry, Abu, we call him Moo, said at the end, you're all right. I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I've just been watching a movie. I've just been in bits watching a movie, but no one knows. So anyone looking from a little bit further ahead in the plane is like, what on earth is going on?
Yeah.
I've had
that on. I think I had that with the movie. I think it was like 13. Oh God, the recent one that was on a plane. I think it was last year, and it was the one about the Thai cave rescue.
Yeah.
You know, with the 13 book, and it was one of the I think it was the Amazon one, because there's been a few, and I was in tears on that one on the plane, because you know they went and they saved the boys and all this and the other, and it was just emotional. But I have seen the adverts or something for Sun, and I thought, oh yeah, that would probably get me. So
definitely a tear.
I stayed away from it for now.
I think the thing to be mindful of, though, in terms of men's mental health, talking as I can only talk from my perspective in this particular situation, it's not actually just about crying. That's one aspect of it. It's about showing vulnerability, but it's also about being able. You talked about, and it's the most salient point actually probably of this whole podcast, where we've got to make sure we talk to people, talk about stuff, get it off, then let it manifest. We know from, you'll certainly know from your health background as well, that if we don't talk, it manifests in the body in many different ways. Inflammation, illness, loads of different things will happen in terms of the chemical process in our body if we hold on to emotions and we don't talk about things that are bothering us. And it can impact our mental health, right? We can change the energy balances in our brain that make us think really bad things or negative things, whatever it might be, that can impact us. And I'll go right back to, okay, it's an executive coaching metaphor by Michael Neal, the lamppost metaphor, which I've talked about before. I love this, which is if you just talk to a lamppost for 30 minutes a day, we'd all feel better. Imagine the power of coaching if you talk to somebody else. Now, it doesn't have to be a coach. That's the point. If you're building stuff up, start by going out on a walk and talking to a tree. It doesn't matter what it is, just talk out loud. I guarantee if you're struggling, it will sound different to the voice in your head. That's the first thing. Once you've got that bit out of the way, try and think of someone or identify someone in your supportive network who isn't going to judge you and talk to them. And you'll be amazed at how it can just drop the shoulders. It can help so much. You'd be amazed about how many people are out there to support you. But if you feel like you're listening to this and you haven't got a support network at all, then go and talk to a tree. Just talk out loud. Just get it out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the first people, when I went for a difficult breakup a number of years ago, I actually remember I took a train down to Brighton, and my sister was surprised because she was like, "Oh, what are you doing down here all of a sudden?" I didn't tell her, but I took my niece out for a walk. Now, she was like 6 months old, and I spent the whole time talking to her about the whole thing. She definitely sensed something, because she came back pretty distraught and miserable after the conversation.
I'm not sure you're supposed to be sharing that bit.
Like, what happened there? And she's only like 6 months old.
That's a sense of energy, right? That's got to be an energy transfer there.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because I talked about those heart fields, and so she's sensing that heart field. But I felt much better, and I actually came back, and it did change a lot of things when I was still with that girl at the time, but we were just going through that patch at the time. And it changed things. And again, I wasn't looking for a response from my niece, although obviously I'm getting a response because she's there just saying, I enjoy living the moment, right? She's not clearly saying that, but because she can't verbalize anything, for her child, it is what it is. They're just hearing your voice. And I wasn't getting any advice from her, but I still felt better for letting it out. Now, for some people, that might not necessarily be verbalizing. Like journaling can actually be just as good. And I used to journal a lot, especially as a teenager. I still have my journals to this day, and I've journaled all through my 20s and 30s and 40s. Not every day or every week or every month, but I might go 6 months or 2, 3, 4 years without journaling.
You're a big believer in the power of gratitude diaries, aren't you, as well? You know, the idea
that I've been doing, 12 years. At the same time. Yeah, I've been doing that for 12 years, every morning and night. And we do I think I've told you, we do the family one.
You have.
Which I really recommend. If you've got a family WhatsApp group, anyone listening, this is what we do, is we just write down 3 things that we're grateful for every night. I'm going to do mine as soon as I get off the call with you. And we've been doing that now. We started it as a 30-day trial, and we've been doing it now. I think we're on day 1700, around there.
So wow.
A long time, amazing. 3 or 4 years, whatever that works out to be. And so every evening around 8-9 o'clock, we see the trickle of things come through. And talking about being close to your family, with the questions that you're asking, this has really made us quite close, because every day you're having communication, and we often talk about things we're grateful for that day, so we get to find out what that person did, but it's not necessarily talking about what we're grateful for that day.
It's a subtle way of learning about the other, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. And I just recommend it. Like, if you've got a family WhatsApp group, or if you haven't, like, get your brothers, sisters, like everyone in there, whoever wants to. And we don't, like, not everyone in my family is doing it. Like, my dad doesn't really like phones and thumbs and swiping and all that. So not everyone in the family is doing it, but so I'm not forcing people to do it, but they're still seeing it, and sometimes they opt in and sometimes they don't.
That's okay. That's the thing. As soon as it's forced, that's what makes it. It doesn't have to. If it's forced, it's not quite the same, is it? So that's the And that's a moment you're probably really grateful for, to be honest. If your dad puts something in there, that's a chance you to go, I'm grateful my dad's today has found motivation to put something in the group, and that's quite a nice thing to celebrate.
Yeah, exactly. So but yeah, I just can't recommend it enough. I really can't.
I think it's we sometimes forget, like, we get so stuck in comparison, and we talk about it a lot because it has such an influence on the world. Social media, comparison with family, comparison with friends, comparison with others. We're all born the same. In theory, we're all born. We layer the comparative stuff on. Like, we have the power to choose whoever we want to be. All right, and whoever you want to be, you can go and be that thing. Don't let anyone else tell you can't be. Don't let, as you talked about the goal bit earlier. If you want to learn, if you want to have a growth mindset, like, learn, try new things. Don't be afraid of failure. You talked about in podcast 7 or 8, fail, which is first attempt in learning. All these things. Like, we think we're not successful because we're often comparing ourselves to what other people might be doing, or we're focusing on failures being a negative thing, not a learning experience.
Oh, it's necessary.
Actually, we all have the power. People can leave the show again with the idea of doing a WhatsApp group with your family. Great advice. I'm just talking to a tree or talking out loud, and understanding we all have the power to choose to be whoever we want to be. I think that can help.
I'm sure it does. I mean, that's it. And we can be flexible, and we can change things as well. And we are going to evolve as well. That's the idea with the identity, is that we're going to have our self-ideal and self-image will evolve over time.
Sure.
And sometimes sticking to the old way is the worst thing, right? Because life is full of evolution.
Right, let's be honest. We're not the same people we were when we met each other, Harry. That's for sure.
No,
we see the world very differently to what I did then, right? That was
I mean, that's it. I was saying to someone today, because I was talking about this podcast, and I was talking about you guys, a couple of the cyclists, and I was saying how we probably had more spirited debates 12, 15 years ago than now, because I think you're reading somewhat similar books and somewhat similar path, and so
what you're actually saying is now the next come out to my way of thinking, we have less. Is that what you're saying? No, I'm joking.
No, and the thing is, my thinking will change again in the future, and also, like, talking with goals, there's always, like, you can have the goal, but flexibility with the way you achieve the goal. But talking about flexibility, so tonight, and I'll leave it with maybe we'll leave it on this one, but I'll leave it with you because you'll be happy to hear. So I've been pretty good all week. There's all this food here, because there's breakfast and dinner included in this resort, and there isn't a huge amount that I can eat because there's not a huge amount of gluten-free vegan stuff going, although there's a bit. And I haven't had any desserts because the desserts have all been gluten, dairy, whatever. And I'm here, and I'm at the table tonight chatting to this 83-year-old blind guy who I've been chatting with most days over dinner, because most of the other guys are in couples and families and whatever else. And I take him, so he takes my arm, and I lead him to the dessert place, and I'm describing all the desserts to him, and I'm loading up. And he took like 6 different desserts. This dude is like, he likes his dessert. So, and I go back to the table, and I've got my hot water, and I'm just drinking my hot water as my dessert. And he's there, and he's gone through his jelly, which I'm not a fan of anyway. He's gone through something else, some banoffee pie and whatever else. And then he comes to the eclair, and he's like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to eat that because I might save it for later. And I was like, you should try that. It looks really good. And I was like, you know what? Sod it, right? I'm going to go and get one. And I got myself an eclair, gave me, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going back to my room after this. So it doesn't really matter if it upsets me or anything like that. Because I was like, I haven't had any desserts here. I'm paying all this money, and all I'm having is the salad and some
hot
chips
water
and hot water. and lentils and whatever else they give me. And so I was like, right, sorry, I'm having this eclair. And actually, yeah, it was.
I love that about you though. You're not so rigid. Like when you want to do something, you'll just do it, and you'll make that choice. It's like it's all
about choice. And I was mindfully aware that potentially I might need the loo or have an upset stomach, but I knew that all I was going to do was come back to this room. And
I'm weak because I'm also in a hotel room where they have a full fire breakfast here, which is not good for my training targets now for Vichy coming up the next Ironman. There's me with all this inspiration. I'm going to do the next Ironman. I've got my why, and this morning, full fire, done. It's there. It's been paid for. I can't say no.
I've got my blender here in hand. I've got my NutriBullet. I brought my powders.
I'm conscious of time. One thing it came to mind with my breakfast. I have to mention it because I challenge anyone listening to this. It's a bit of fun. We'll finish on a bit of fun. We've gone a bit deep on a few bits. Someone said to me, Nick, so have you ever tried orange juice? I'm like, yeah, I've tried orange juice. He says, right, can you describe the taste of orange juice to someone who's never tried it? And you can't. The person who hasn't tried it will never, ever, ever know what it tastes like, no matter how much I tried to describe it. I just thought that was a really interesting concept. Now, obviously, it's not just unique to orange juice. But unless you've tried it, it's one of those things that you just can't. Just thought I like that. It linked to breakfast. And I thought, I'll bring it up. There's a challenge for anyone listening. Try and describe to someone what
things to you have to experience things to gain a wisdom about them, which actually is, I think I mentioned it before, the saying that I've got, never try, never know. The actual I think I mentioned it in one of the previous podcasts, the thing I got in Malaysia for the tattoo that I was going to put, which says never try, never know.
Never try. I don't know if you have mentioned it, but I like
that. Well, that was, I thought I had, but like it was the tattoo I was looking for, and I never got a tattoo in the end, but the phrase I was looking for was never try, never know. But actually the direct translation was, without having experienced an event, one cannot gain wisdom. And so it's that.
Which actually, maybe for another show, all links to consciousness, which is something that's still baffling science to this day, because we can't quite get to grips with whether other things even have consciousness. We don't quite know it yet. We don't know how to explain it or define it. We can try and do it through mathematical and physiology and studies and all of these things, but actually there's still no definitive answer as to whether a tree has or does not have, as an example, a consciousness. And until we can't disprove it yet, which I think is for another day. But anyway,
for another day, we could talk for years on that one.
We can. All right, buddy. Well, listen, I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of it's quite late for you, isn't it? So I'll let you go.
It's 4:11, and if I'm going to do a ride tomorrow, if my knee holds up, I should be heading to bed very, very shortly.
Good stuff. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of Greece. Really good to catch up. You've missed some great weather here in the UK, but it sounds like...
I hear it's thunderstorms coming, though, so that would be good.
Yeah, it's always, when you go away, I always want everyone else to have thunderstorms at home. I can't help it. I'm just a bad person. But I want sun where I am and thunderstorms everywhere else. Right. Yeah. Good stuff. Listen, buddy, I'll look forward to seeing you next week. But have a great finish to your holiday.
All right. Take care, Nick. Take care, everyone.
Cheers, man. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to the Mindful Past podcast with Nick Day and Hari Kalymnios.
We hope you found our discussion insightful and gained valuable takeaways to support you on your journey.
Please do leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform and share an episode that's resonated with you with a friend or a family member who you think may also find it valuable.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to ensure you never miss a future episode.
In the meantime,
we'll continue exploring mindful path topics to provide you with more insights and ideas to support your personal growth.
For now, thank you for your support, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode of the Mindful Path podcast real soon.